The Ready, Set, Grow podcast is sponsored by Ag Expert, software designed for Canadian agriculture. Visit them today at agexpert.ca.
Welcome to the Ready, Set, Grow podcast. I'm your host, Michael Dales. Today, we're excited to be joined by Joe Dales and our special guest, Dr. Lorne Hepworth, a renowned Canadian veterinarian and agricultural leader. With a career spanning from politics to his role as the president of CropLife Canada, Canadian Agricultural Hall of Fame inductee, and a member of the Order of Canada, Lorne has a lot to share with us today. He's been a driving force in advancing science and technology in agriculture. And join us today as we explore his journey and insights into the future of farming and food production through his current work as the chair of Agricultural Research and Innovation Ontario. Thank you so much, Lorne, for joining us today, and we look forward to learning a little bit about what you're doing and ARIO.
Yeah, thanks, Lorne. It's an honor to have you on here, and I just want to thank you in advance for all your leadership and all your drive and passion and commitment to Canadian agriculture. People never say thanks enough, and I'd like to thank from my behalf, but also on behalf of the people on here. Let's take a few minutes and if you can go back a little bit, tell us a little bit about the Lorne story. Where you're from and a bit of your fascinating journey, and then we'll bring you up to where we are with ARIO in a few minutes.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for doing this. Thanks for your warm words of welcome. Yeah, I started out. I'm a farm boy raised in southern Saskatchewan on a mixed farm, cattle and crops mainly. And as was mentioned, started out life as a veterinarian and had 2 or 3 other careers, which just maybe makes the point that I couldn't hold a job. But I enjoyed every one of the careers that I had. The first one being several years in private practice as a veterinarian, and then spent nearly 10 years in the world of politics, and was able to and humbled to be able to serve in some cabinet positions there. One of which was Minister of Agriculture, which in Saskatchewan is quite a big thing, and then ended up in the industry association world with CropLife Canada, Plant Life Science Industry Association. And so, like I said, if all those opportunities to change courses occurred again, I would make all the same decisions. In terms of the research side, I think if you're, from the world of agriculture and farming, I think there's an inherent recognition of the importance of research. Farmers are constantly looking at how they can do things better and smarter and more efficient and more effective. So it's just almost inherent, if you like, to the farm mentality. But I ended up through the course of those various careers. In fact, when I was in the government, one of the things that we put in place was the Agriculture Development Fund, which was the Saskatchewan's research funding organization, which I think still survives to this day, several decades later. Also, over the years, served with some research organizations. Sat on the board of sat on the board of Genome Canada. Was chair there. Obviously, big genomics thrust of that research agenda. Agriculture and healthcare being the 2 big areas that were funded from the Genome Canada standpoint. I also was part of the Canadian International Food Security Research Fund committee to look at what should be funded under that federal funding. Was a founding board member of the Global Institute for Food Security in Saskatchewan, which was a partnership between University of Saskatchewan, the government of Saskatchewan, and Potash Corporation at the time, now Nutrien. So I've had a fairly long, I guess farming has been it and agriculture has been it for my life, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a really long, fascinating journey through a lot of different facets in agriculture. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently with ARIO and I guess how you got your current role as the chair?
Yeah, so ARIO stands for the stands for Agricultural Research and Innovation Ontario. That's as of July 1st this year. Prior to that, it was known for some 60 years as the Agricultural Research Institute of Ontario. And why I say that's newly named is because we just had the legislation that governed ARIO for some 60 years, had it modernized, including a new name. And it's an agency of the government, an agency of the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Agribusiness. So we report to the minister, and we have basically three functions. One is to advise the minister on research priorities. The second is that we are the owners of the research properties and research stations across the province, and that's some 14 stations, and on some 5,000 acres of land. So quite a significant investment in research infrastructure, and that infrastructure has been undergoing for the last several years some major updates and modernization itself. We've got state-of-the-art facilities, just basically new or near new, in terms of dairy research facility, beef cattle research facility, swine research facility, some food prep facility, an update to our aquaculture facility. Newly announced or recently announced is going to be a brand new poultry research facility. And a lot of the facilities I just mentioned are at one of our major hubs for our research stations, and that's at Lorne, just north of Guelph. So the ownership of this research infrastructure is part of the ARIO mandate. And the third thing that we do is to promote the benefits of research and innovation. Just coming back to the research stations for a minute. So while we own them, they are operated and managed by the University of Guelph through an agreement, but they are open to other research institutions to do research at these various stations that are spread across the province. So it's a fairly significant investment that's been made and undertaken by successive governments over many years. I mean, I think our book value on the assets we have is, north of 135 million, of probably the market value well north of probably a couple $100 million. I mean, you folks probably know them. We have 5,000 acres of pretty decent farmland in Ontario. That's a pretty valuable asset. So a great investment that's been made on behalf of the agriculture sector here in Ontario by the successive governments.
With your perspective and as chair, Lorne, what I would like a few comments on your thoughts on both the impact of research and then some of the challenges and opportunities on research, and how can we support ARIO, the rest of the industry? Are there any things that you need or you would like to see? I know that's kind of open-ended, but just continuing down this whole vein on, how do we help farmers do a better job, through research?
Yeah, I mean, one of the observations that you and others might have made in not too recent history and recent times is as we were going through the consultation process on the new act, what we've learned pretty quickly is that a lot of the stakeholders, farm groups, commodity groups, and others had little to no knowledge about ARIO and the fact that there were these research stations and all this land on which to do research plot work. So, from our standpoint, number one is we've obviously got this very rich and long-standing relationship with the U of G that operate these facilities for us, and obviously they're researchers doing research at these various stations. But we realize that we've got to do a better job of reaching out to stakeholders and advising them what's available there by way of infrastructure to do research. And part of that is just making it known that ARIO, the new version of ARIO, even exists. One of the significant benefits of ARIO and this ownership of the land is that we're not vulnerable to administrations coming along and deciding, hey, we need to raise some cash, so let's sell off some buildings or some land here, which is the opposite of what you need to do research on a long-term, especially discovery science type research, or even very applied research. And so having that ownership in a separate entity, in this case ARIO, I would argue is a huge benefit to the agriculture sector. I mean, an example of that is, this probably goes back 3 or 4 years ago now, but the Ridgetown station and the Elora station celebrated the fact that I think Ridgetown was, and this I said goes back 3 or 4 years ago, had 25 years of continuous crop rotation / soil studies on the same site. Elora, I think, had something like 40 years of history and research. And that was enabled because there was this ownership, this vested ownership that provided certainty to the researchers that they could do plots and that require rotations and different things in different years, and this enabled them to do that. So facilitating and enabling that kind of work at the research stations, I think, is one of the big pluses that ARIO has been able to bring to the system because of its ownership. A more recent event that I think to me was kind of interesting and very timely, given you hear a lot about cybersecurity these days. A couple, 3 months ago, at our modern, up-to-date dairy research center, we held a field day and wet lab on cybersecurity as related to the dairy sector, and then it was followed that afternoon by a bit of a symposia. It was very well attended, and I think a lot of people think of cybersecurity. Well, it's you don't see the big stories like you see in municipalities or financial institutions getting cyber attacks, but there's been some very notable ones, including in Canada and including in Ontario, cyber attacks. And the wet lab was an example to show at our facility with robotic milkers, etc. Here's what can happen. I mean, they shut it down. It was like a wet lab. They shut it down as if they were a hacker. And guess what? The cows are, lined up, pushing on the gate, but the robotic milker doesn't work anymore. And so it was, a really good impact exercise, if you like, around this whole business of, a risk to agriculture today being a whole cyber risk, right? So, just a couple of examples of long-standing research in one case, and another one just more recent important research thrust.
With a lot of these changes going on, what trends do you see shaping the future of agriculture and food production?
Yeah, I don't know. I probably don't have any, earth-shattering kinds of observations there, because there's a lot of stuff that you see in the media, and so I think I'd probably reiterate a lot of the same things that I hear and see. The whole disruptive technology area, whether it's robotics, genomics, automation, artificial intelligence. That role and the disruptive and positive role, hopefully, and all that, I think is going to continue to shape the food system. The regulatory system, I think, is one that's always challenging and but has the potential to be a plus for Canada if we so choose. And what I mean by that is, you remember when the COVID vaccines were being developed?
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. administration talked about doing this within a year, doing it at warp speed, using messenger RNA, which is a technique that's used in crops in Canada, right? And the reality is that by really focusing and throwing resources at it, they were able, in a year roughly, to develop these vaccines for COVID with full regulatory approval. And I use that as an example, as a couple of the highly regulated areas that my history are GMO/biotech crops and pesticides. And we sort of come to accept, as have governments and as have our regulators, that to get an approval for these products, these very beneficial technologies that are beneficial to production and food security and food safety and environment, we've just come to accept that, it takes 10 or 11 or 12 years, and that's the way it is. And hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet if food security and the nutritional security of people around the world is as equal a challenge as COVID was, why do we just accept that mediocrity when we know that if you really put your head to it and work collaboratively, which regulatory agencies around the world did, each nation had to approve it at the end of the day. If you work collaboratively and really focus your resources, that's what can be done. Yeah. And if we're going to deal with some of these big challenges like food and nutritional security, then maybe we need to think about some kind of warp speed attention to our to the world of regulation.
Good point.
Another, there's the intergenerational challenge is, I think, another issue that agriculture is going to face. One of the areas that I think is really interesting, and once again, really interesting for Canada, is water. I mean, water in some ways is the new oil, right? Some would say that anyways. And, boy, we're kind of blessed with that. And not that you abuse it, but how do we further take advantage of this competitive advantage that we have? I mean, the fruit and vegetable sector. I mean, hey, I don't know, apples like 90% water. Something. I mean, sure. There's some opportunities here, I think, through proper sustainable use of water resources that probably could be very beneficial to us down the road. One wild card out there, and I might sound a bit weird for raising this in terms of talking about future trends and all that kind of stuff, is these whole, Ozempic type drugs, right? And, one might argue, well, what does that really mean for the food industry? But, J.P. Morgan did a paper on this not that long ago, which I thought was pretty interesting, actually. And some of the food companies, when this first came out, you saw some stories out there about, what does this mean? Are people going to be buying way less food of my products at the grocery stores? And to me, I think it's pretty interesting because I think, first of all, it's, obesity is a big health issue. I mean, this came out from diabetes to start with. They're starting to show other things. Heart, could be useful from the heart standpoint and addiction standpoint as well. But I mean, one of the nutritional or / food impacts you apparently see is as people get more conscious, as they're medicating themselves, is they're more conscious of what they're eating. So the protein goes up, and all the things I like, the chips that I like to eat while I'm watching the Blue Jays lose, I'm going to probably end up eating less of those and snacks and all that kind of stuff. So, that can tip. One could argue, not the mainstream meat potatoes part of the diet, but a bit of an interesting twist in terms of people starting to pay more and more attention to that aspect of their life. The other area that to me is interesting on a go-forward basis for the food industry and the agri-food industry is the cultural and religious food consumption trends. And I see this in spades. We're in London, where we live. In terms of the various ethnicities are here and the various food tastes and predilections they have. And, there's been grocers that are addressing that, with specialty grocers, et cetera. But I think that's probably going to be an increasing trend. And that gets you into new crops sometimes and new foods. And and which is in itself presents a challenge, because what do we grow today? Like about 120 commodities, or raise 120 commodities in Ontario.
Yeah.
That's our greatest strength and greatest weakness at the same time, because we probably can't be wonderful at all of them. And yet some of these new crops and new foods for these various cultural ethnicities might even precipitate further different and new crops. So, I could go on to talk in terms of trends. I could go on to talk about, value chains and infrastructure that we need and all the rest of it. But those are maybe some couple of maybe slightly off the wall observations that I would have that might affect. Actually, one other one I should mention is like the skill set that we need for our.
Right. Absolutely.
And there's a number of dimensions of that, whether it's, technologists and just people to do the work on the farm. And RBC did some pretty good work in identifying 6 different areas where, we've got some major challenges from a human resource standpoint in the future, and upskilling, reskilling, getting the right skills. That once again speaks to the immigrants and the skill sets that we might want to help make sure that we can help them with.
Yeah, people's always the number one issue. Big companies, little companies, farms, big, small. It's always top of mind, and especially with all the succession that we're going to have to see over the next 20 years as well, as farmers age out a little bit. They're warriors. They're going to go till they almost drop, but go with their boots on. But we need to have a plan for some of that knowledge transfer.
Yeah, I got some relatives that definitely fall in that category you just talked about. They're probably will go with their boots on.
Yeah. It's just great listening to you, and the amount of opportunity change that's kind of research driven or innovation driven. It's going to require some really heavy lifting. ARIO is one entity. There's other entities out there. How do you guys collaborate with, Agriculture Canada, for instance, and other provinces and other stakeholder groups out there? And is there a call to action to how can we engage with ARIO to get more leverage and just make things go faster, like you were talking about? Any comments or thoughts there?
Yeah, really, really good question and observation. It's an area that we need to really up our game on. AAFC specifically, we have a representative from there that sits ex officio on our board, which has been really great. I mean,
that's Sergio in London here, and we'll shout out to Sergio because we love him. He's hustling and trying hard.
I agree totally, and he's been prepared to give ARI his time and his insights. I mean, they operate stations. We operate stations. I've been to a couple. We did a tour of the London one. I've been down to the Harrow one, and see what they're doing, what we're doing. Were there any possible intersections in Vineland? Well, obviously, both have operations down there. So from AFC, we've got a good conduit, and I think we're doing better than we were there. Where I think we've really have some opportunities, or it's a work in progress, is just reaching out to the stakeholder community and the value chain generally. We're, as part of our strategic plan, our new strategic plan, this is an explicit objective, because we are going to need to enable and foster more partnerships with the private sector, industry, with other research institutions in a much bigger way than we have. I mean, part of that is co-funding, and that's partly because of if we want to move the needle, ARIO's vision is we want to enable high impact transformational research. Clearly, government, OMAFA, is going to continue to be a major provider of funds, but we need to think about novel ways, other ways, new ways to engage in partnerships and collaborators. And how do we, and part of that is leveraging the assets we have. And as I said, when we did these consultations around the Act, it was a surprise to many people that showed up that they didn't know we had 5,000 acres of land that you could do research on, and 14 stations with 200 buildings and all of that. So we we need to do a better job there. The second area we need to do a better job in, thanks to you and some of your colleagues for helping us out here in the Grove and all that, is we were still historically very heavily oriented to the production side of agriculture, and less so to the value-added food side. And that's another area that I think, we've got that as an objective. And that fits with, if you like, the Ontario government's, MAFRA's announcement of their Grow Ontario strategy. Yes, we want to increase farm production, but we also want to increase the value-added component, the jobs, and the really magnifying effect on the GDP. So that's another area that we need to work on. To that end, we've had, we've been holding some roundtables. We got, 10 people on the board. We don't have a monopoly on good ideas. So we've been pulling in other stakeholders to talk to them about what they see as priorities and what the needs and challenges are. I may have mentioned already, I can't remember, we had our last board meeting here in London, where we could then reach out to the University of Western Ontario. We had a couple of great presentations from their researchers, FANSOC colleagues. The dean came in. So all that to say, we need to do a better job. And it's very much part of our new strategic plan. And part of it is communication. Part of it is opportunities to partners and co-funders and make 2 + 2 into 7 kind of thing. So, yeah.
Going back a little bit, you were talking about bringing smart people into agriculture. What advice would you give young researchers, innovators entering the agri-food sector?
I mean, typically they're very passionate and become very knowledgeable about their area. And if I had, and I've seen this, whether it's research or practically any job you have, if you like, is to cultivate really good communication skills. I mean, I've seen more ideas lost because the individual couldn't get the concept or the idea over to the audience, and you lose maybe an opportunity. It might be funding, it might be a promotion, it might be a new research leg, but the ability to communicate what you're doing and to be able to target it to the audience, to me, is a great asset to have in their armament. I mean, very often they're super knowledgeable, but you got to be to get that story across. The other, what was the other thing I was thinking might be? Oh yeah, and networking, right? Getting outside there. I'm probably guilty too. We all have our own little comfort zone. Here's the people I like to reach out to. If I'm a researcher, I go to research conferences. Well, if you're a researcher, you need to go to an industry conference. You might not be the speaker this time, but to get, rub shoulders over the coffee breaks and to network with these individuals who may be future collaborators or partners or funders. So, networking. So like I said, neither one of these are like earth-shattering suggestions, but from what I've seen over the years, like I said, I just repeat it, I've seen more good ideas lost because of an inability to communicate them. Yeah, for sure.
Great feedback, and great wisdom for the young folks. We're coming up on time here, Lorne. Any final thoughts or any final comments you want to make to the audience, and then how can people get a hold of you or ARIO?
Yeah, just one thought, stepping back a fair bit, is like one of the things that I think has got to happen in Ontario and in Canada generally is we've really got to step up in our funding for agricultural research and innovation. Not that there hasn't been some significant funding, and obviously infrastructure funding has been massive for ARIO, but we really need to step up our game there and really get serious about, especially, like I said, if we're going to have high impact transformational research. The stuff like artificial insemination cattle was a game changer. GMO technology was a game changer. What's the next game changer for agriculture in Canada? So we really need to see governments and partners really step up to the plate. And I'm talking significant increases. I'm talking big increases in targeted, focused research areas. I raise that because I think part of that challenge is we've got to remind people, even people that are close to agriculture and the policymakers and the funders, about the importance of the agri-food sector. It's just gone over this last year in Ontario. We're just now slightly over $50 billion at the GDP contribution from agriculture in Ontario. And the part of this is the importance of agriculture is, McKinsey talked about how we can be a superpower. Conference Board of Canada a few years, the same thing. We have this great opportunity here to contribute to the economic growth of Canada. That becomes doubly important when you hear statements like the Deputy Bank Governor, Carolyn Rogers, David Dodge out of Bennett Jones, RBC, all of them in the last few months. Carolyn talked about we've got to grow the economy. Our productivity gap with the U.S. is getting worse and worse. We're worse than Australia in terms of our growth. And agriculture can contribute to that productivity growth. And I raise this because it's a little bit, I feel like right now that agriculture and the agri-food sector has fallen into the shadows a little bit on the public political radar screen. This might be unfair, but it sometimes appears like the latest new shiny thing, EV cars and batteries, is getting all the attention and some significant investment.
Yeah.
And agriculture and the agri-food sector, hey, with that if we had some of those kinds of investments, we could make some big contributions too. So that's a bit of whining, some might argue, but
no. I think if people like you aren't making that point, the consumer doesn't understand. The consumer doesn't know the opportunity. I think when you wrap that investment around, how can we protect intellectual property with patents and brands and come up with these new innovations, we can create a ton of new jobs in Canada, and we can be that powerhouse that feeds the world, plus generates a lot of prosperity for our country. So I'm absolutely right with you. I understand because 99% of the population is not involved in agriculture or the sector, other than they're consumers of food. They don't know. So I think when you bring out, hey, we're generating 50 billion of GDP, what percentage of R&D is going back into that? It's a rounding error. It's insignificant. It's not significant. Yeah. So let's invest in our people, and let's invest in, that we have water and we have millions and millions of acres, and we have some of the best farmers and smartest farmers in the world, and unlock that potential. Yep. So I'm right with you, Lorne.
I'm probably delaying here, but just to that point, the interesting the opportunity in agriculture to make this contribution was enunciated a little bit in the RBC report on sure. our competitive or lack of productivity, when they went through, I think, about 14 different sectors. I mean, and virtually all of them had really ugly numbers in terms of the productivity gap and all the rest of it. The one that actually held out a little bit of hope is the agri-food sector.
Sure.
Because we have done some scale up, because we have adopted technology and precision, some of these kinds of things. So they had a little box where they talked about lessons learned, and they used agriculture as the example. So let's run with the winners, Canada and Ontario. So you asked about how people can get a hold of ARIO. Hey, I'm the chair. Happy to, they can email me, lorne.hepworth@gmail.com. Yeah.
Thank you, Lorne, for sharing some of your great insights with us today. And I just want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the Ready, Set, Grow podcast. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode with our special guest, Dr. Lorne Hepworth. We covered a lot of ground about ARIO, and the website will be in the description if you want to learn more about some of the work that they're doing. Thank you again, Lorne, for joining us, and We look forward to talking to you in the future.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Lorne.
It was great fun. Always enjoy talking about my favorite subject.